Welcome to the Tackling Tech podcast, powered by Dyknow. Join us as we tackle all things ed tech with insightful interviews, actionable tips, and strategies that you can implement in your school or district to make technology integration more effective. Whether you're a teacher, a tech coach, or a technology administrator, we're giving you an advantage in your role by sharing stories from people who are passionate about working with their peers and enhancing the learning experience with technology. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now let's tackle some tech.
What is up? Welcome back to Tackling Tech, a podcast that shares stories to help you build better collaboration in K-12 schools, and a show that is dedicated to putting a voice to remote learning. I am your host, Brett McGrath, Vice President of Marketing at Dyknow, and I hope you all are doing just great. Today, as you listen to this episode, I am really excited for today's conversation. I speak with LaQuisha Hall, who is an amazing educator at Baltimore City Schools. She won the 2018 Teacher of the Year. She is just full of energy and full of key insights on how to think about social emotional learning and connect with her students. I had so much fun learning from her. I think you'll enjoy this one too. She is the type of person I love to bring on the show, because you can tell she is extremely dedicated to her work and she is extremely dedicated to serving her students. There might be another opportunity for LaQuisha to pop up in something that might be coming soon. Teaser alert, I am excited to share more information, hopefully next week, on some big things that we're doing with the involvement of amazing educators like LaQuisha. If you like what you're hearing, definitely hit the subscribe button on Tackling Tech. Leave us a review if you wouldn't be so kind. Tell a teacher, tell a tech coach, tell an admin, tell a superintendent that you're enjoying the show. We really appreciate that support. We're doing some amazing things, some new video series releases on our YouTube page, our Dyknow YouTube page. Go check that out and hit the subscribe button. I'm really excited for some of the work that's popping up there. Tiara's doing a heck of a job on Tech Coach Corner, and we're just building that out. And also, you're going to want to follow us on Instagram at Dyknow_K12. Maggie's running that channel, and there is just a lot of exciting things to come, and they're probably happening as this episode is released right now. So make sure you go follow us on Instagram. And you know we're on Twitter, at Dyknow, at Tackling Tech Pod. Tons of content coming out. We're not stopping. We're enjoying what we're doing. That's it for the plugs. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to kick it over to the conversation. I hope you enjoy this one. All right, everybody, welcome back to Tackling Tech. I'm really excited about this conversation today. I am joined by LaQuisha Hall. Before we jumped on, I was trading emails with her, and I looked at her email signature, and there's a lot of credentials. City Schools Opportunity Culture Coach, 2018 Baltimore City Teacher of the Year, founder of Queendom T.E.A, the Etiquette Academy, along with her social handles. So there is a lot of things going on, and I was doing some research before, so definitely some passion from LaQuisha in terms of what she's about and what she likes to do in terms of education and entrepreneurship. So LaQuisha, welcome to Tackling Tech. How are you doing today?
Oh man, I'm doing awesome now that you just gave me that great introduction.
Why don't you talk a little bit about, I named, I guess maybe start, you work in a big school district, Baltimore City. So maybe talk about your work experience within that district. What have you done and kind of what are you working on now?
Absolutely. So I have been in Baltimore City public schools my entire career, fresh out of college, and I'm going on, this is my 18th year in the district. And so within these 18 years, I've discovered a lot of needs for teachers and for students. And so I had taken on opportunities to support teachers by creating opportunities virtually for them to join in with teachers from all over the world and just troubleshoot things that they're experiencing in the classroom. We call that Real Talk for Ed. And then, as you mentioned, Queendom T was birthed from girls staying after school often claiming they wanted to wash my board and help me clean up my room, but truly wanting someone just to listen to them. They had lots of conversations with me about life. And so from that, I created a girls mentoring program called Queendom T.E.A. And it's still going strong today. Started in 2008.
Wow. So I think that's super interesting. And just touching on that, I think especially now when there's a lot of educators teaching virtually, and it seems like the connection between teachers and students is the gap is growing. And so student engagement is a big component of topic that I've been talking to a lot of educators about. I guess it sounds unique to me that students would want to hang out with a teacher maybe after hours. Talk to me about like that. How did that relationship start? Because I think that's super powerful. And like based on your observations, like what did you see that made you think, well, this is not only powerful, but I need to make this a thing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I truly believe in the power of student-teacher relationships first. And I know that that is a hot topic right now in education. However, it was important to me before it became a hot topic. So I am a survivor of abuse as well. I also advocate outside of education for the sexual assault awareness and domestic violence prevention. And so as a result, I'm very open with my story, even with my students. And so I've always, since I've been an educator, been that way. And in bringing my authentic self in the classroom and being vulnerable and sharing with them that I've overcome some similar challenges to them, they had the opportunity to see me as human and not just as the person in charge of the room, right? And so in putting myself in that position, which can be risky, and I understand that a lot of teachers are nervous about, sharing personal stories with students, but I have found it to be a game changer as far as starting to build their bridge with students. And so they no longer look at me as Mrs. Hall, the teacher. They look at me as Mrs. Hall, who cares about me, someone I can go to if I'm being abused or hurt or if I'm in trouble, because she already understands and has been there. And so, honestly, my relationships early in my career was so much better with girls than they were young men. I didn't know a lot of times how to entreat them initially in my career, as was mentioned in a book written about me this year. But I have learned that being authentic with your story, yourself, and being vulnerable with your class can allow doors to open that you wouldn't even imagine. And so relationships, I believe, start with the vulnerability of the teacher.
I love that. I that's super powerful. Vulnerability, I think, just being open and honest and being authentic definitely leads to stronger connections between teachers like yourself and students. I'm curious, what has been, over the years of you doing this, what has been the connections you've made with other teachers around you? Obviously, they've observed these connections you're making with students, and you starting the Etiquette Academy. Like, have teachers come to you asking you questions about how to better drive student engagement? Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. Teachers, I often get questions from teachers about how I started the mentoring program, how to build relationships with students. I get those questions often, but I will say this. I usually get those questions from newer teachers. And so I think because they don't have as much experience and they might be grappling with how do I do this, they're more open to that kind of conversation. What I have discovered is sometimes veteran teachers or teachers who are more invested or deeply in the work, they kind of get a groove, and whatever their groove is, they just keep going with it. And so sometimes there's not always room for change with teachers who already have a structure in place. And so I take it upon myself, honestly, to provide that support to those who ask and just model how it should be done. And then I just hope, to reach more teachers in that way. But definitely provide the opportunity and space for teachers to approach me for strategies and ideas.
I love what you called out with just the groove and how some teachers are stuck in their way of operating and they don't want to change.
Yeah.
I think back to just COVID when everyone was sent home and you had teachers that were, we've talked about this on the podcast a lot, teachers that were tech comfortable. So when they went home, yes, it was tough to adapt. However, they believed in the use of technology in their classroom, which made it easier to connect with students in this atypical environment. But then on the other side of that, you had teachers that were tech uncomfortable who were scrambling to try to figure out how to use technology or being forced to use it for the first time. And I think from what I've heard, there's been just so many stories pertaining to that I think on the other side, like this experience for everything will be better and more teachers will be embracing technology in the classroom. So like sharing that story, but then pairing that with like what you're talking about, I feel like this experience in this atypical time has also brought more attention than ever to social emotional learning. And that's something, I know you are passionate about and like to talk about. So I guess, how do you see like social emotional learning where it was maybe before COVID hit to where it is now? What are your observations from people you're working with directly or indirectly?
Well, I will say I saw a lot of the word social emotional learning buzzing around just right before COVID, actually. And I'm, while it was just like trigger words in education at the time, I'm glad that it became that at the time that it did, because it needed to transfer into this COVID teaching era that we're in right now. And so I will say that I feel that most of my career, I have been practicing SEL strategies with students, but I just didn't know that that's what it was called, right? So anytime you put the emotional or social needs of a child in front of them and support them with that, you have practiced social emotional learning. One of the things that I want to say about that is I feel like right now we focus so much on the emotional part. So teachers, school districts are emphasizing, make sure the students' emotions are well, make sure they are okay, do check-ins. They're giving all these strategies and all this advice to making sure their emotional needs are set. What I think we forget is the social part. You can't neglect that part, because they have to be able to articulate what it is that they're feeling emotionally. They have to be able to articulate just ideas and their voice in general, just having it and experiencing, hearing it, and knowing that the person hearing it wants to hear it, right? So we have student voice, which is becoming a buzzword now in education. But I think that part's a little left out sometimes. What does student voice really look like? How do you give students a voice? And that's not just asking them to identify a color on a chart to indicate to the teacher what mood they're in. So I've gone as far as that example that I just gave, all the way up to having students write their own stories and publishing them in a book, and inviting the community in to purchase their books from them. And so that gave them a sense of voice that they had not experienced in education before. And I think it fueled them to want to do more, speak more, write more. And it also impacted the parents greatly. There were some parents that didn't even know what their children were going through until they read their chapter of the book. And so I think when we talk about emotions, that's good and it's great and it needs to be addressed. But we also got to talk about, what does that really look like when we give them the social part, when we amplify that, when we give them a voice, and when we truly as adults take away that old school teaching of stay in a child's place, you shouldn't talk when adults are talking, and really hear them.
I love that. And I think, some teachers out there listening probably agree with almost everything you said in terms of the tactics and strategies, but they might be fearful that if you give them too much of a voice, then it can turn into disruption and chaos and they might lose control. What recommendations would you have for teachers that are listening, have been reading the buzzwords, but are just fearful for getting started? Like what would your approach be, or your guidance to teachers that want to be more mindful of social and emotional learning within their students?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. First of all, I would highly recommend starting at the beginning of a school year. So, of course, in the middle of a school year, if students are used to being silenced or whatever the structure and organization of a classroom is, if they're used to being silenced, then trying to get them to talk in the middle of a school year is nearly impossible because they've gotten accustomed to going into that space and with a certain mindset. And so starting the school year with being vulnerable, as I mentioned earlier, and also talking to students about why you are asking them to speak, why you're asking them to share their emotions, their thoughts, telling them why their thoughts are important, encouraging them that leadership is not in an age, of size, or range. And I always tell my students that, if I have 25 students in my class, I always say to them, there are 26 leaders in here. And so I want them to understand that while I've been hired to provide an education to them, I'm literally just being a guide for them to be educated, right? The leadership is really in them. They're leading themselves to a path that I'm just guiding them on. And so a lot of times teachers take this stance of I'm in charge, I'm in control, I'm the ultimate authority in the classroom. And so it's hard to encourage student voice when your voice is the one only that's been amplified in the classroom. And so providing spaces for kids to just really talk about not just what you're teaching, but about themselves and their neighborhood, their lives, their experiences. There's a practice called restorative circles, 10 to 15 minutes once a week, where you just allow students to sit in a circle and discuss a topic that's important to them. Giving them those opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have in school. You'd be surprised how many students will share things that you didn't expect them to share, or even say, this is the only time of day, or, I can't share this at home with my parents. They're fearful. The kids are fearful sometimes of what the results will be of them being authentic, right? And so we have to let them know and show them that their authentic selves matter, that their voice matters. And then when you do that, it changes what the classroom culture and climate looks like. So you don't have to work so hard to get your students to work hard, because they value you because they know you value them.
That's really good. I love that perspective. I'm curious, it got me thinking about, I love what you talked about leadership and empowering everyone to think that everyone's a leader in this room. What happens when those students who are bought into your system and your classroom and what they feel good and they're getting to talk and share their beliefs? What happens then when they go leave your classroom and go to other classrooms where it's different? Like, how big of a role is the school culture in making it seem like it's not just a one classroom thing, but this is what we believe in, how we operate as a school or a district or a system?
So listen, when you get the answer to that question, Brett, you are going to change public education. Listen, I'm just going to tell you the truth. It's hard to, I can tell you that I was always successful in my classroom with creating that climate, but I always had to clean it up every time they returned to me, because you're absolutely correct. When all teachers don't adopt that, or if the school culture and climate does not represent that same vibe of the classroom culture that you've created, it's going to fall apart as soon as they leave your room. When I say fall apart, though, this is what I want to emphasize. It's going to fall apart in other classrooms. It's going to fall apart in the hall, in the cafeteria, and things like that. But what will happen is that they'll know that there's a teacher or a person in the building that they can go to when they get severely frustrated, when they know they need their voice heard. At least you turn into a resource for those students after they leave your classroom. So even if it's not being implemented, your role, your job isn't done when the bell rings, right? And so I think it's important to note that. And no matter what happens outside your classroom, they carry that with them through their lives. So I've had students transfer to other schools and come back to me and say, look, Ms. Hall, look at what I'm doing here, because of the leadership that was built in my classroom, right? And so they carried it with them. And the teachers that honed in on that wherever they went, they fully embraced it because they had already experienced it.
Yeah, I know. I figured you probably didn't have the answer to that one, but I was curious on what you're going to say. I I think people love stories. I love stories. Do you have just an example of like when you think about your time and focusing on this problem and focusing on empowering students? Do you have like a specific story that comes to mind in a relationship you've had with a student that might have been at one point in their life and then through being part of your mentor program or just being a student of yours, and you trying different tactics, you saw them grow into, something a lot different?
Absolutely. I had this student named Alexis. I taught her nearly 10 years ago. I taught her for 3 years in a row, and she was a great academic student, but she had a lot of emotional things happening outside of school that she sometimes brought into the school with her. And I can talk about this now. She's an adult, and like we connected on Facebook, so she used to me sharing her story. But she was actually being sexually abused in her past, and it had been investigated. Her family was going through a lot, and as she matriculated through high school, I tried to help her with those emotional feelings that she was experiencing and feeling. She was in Queendom T.E.A. She became a leader by her junior year in the program. Like I could leave her in the room and she could run the whole show. And when she graduated, she got into a relationship shortly after with a young man who was abusive towards her. Because of the lessons that I taught in Queendom and the conversations and the community leaders that I brought in to present to them, she knew that what she was experiencing was not right. And so she was able to get out of the relationship before it got terrible. And then she contacted me afterwards to let me know that she had left. I was so proud of her and just, honored that she would even reach out to let me know that. But what she also shared with me, because we were connected on social media, was she said, "Miss Hall, I need to tell my story. You always told us we need to talk about what we're feeling and what we're going through." And so I also, Brett, another thing, I also have a nonprofit program called SheRose Awards, where I had an annual gala where unsung survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence had a platform to tell their stories at a gala. And it was like an award ceremony where they got honored in front of family and friends. And so she wanted to tell her story at the event and asked if she could participate. And so she was the first student that I ever had in my classroom that participated in something of mine outside of education, right? And I was just so honored the way she told her story. She took it all the way back to her 9th grade year, which is when I started teaching her, and talked about the lessons that were presented to her and all of that. And so now she's constantly on social media empowering others and sharing inspiration and hopeful messages. And that's what I'm just glad that I got to see it firsthand. Sometimes it takes teachers a long time to experience the fruit of their work. And I feel like I experienced it so much sooner because I understood that SEL part a lot sooner in my career.
That's an incredible story. I appreciate you sharing. I think that definitely helps give everyone listening to some perspective of what's possible when you're mindful with, emotions and in class and the way you're teaching. So maybe we close out with this one. I'm curious. Everyone's in a different situation right now teaching. You've got teachers that are in the building. You've got teachers that are doing at home. You've got teachers that are a mixture of both. If you're speaking to teachers right now, what are your recommendations for how to be more mindful of just student situations during the pandemic and this period of time? What are some pieces of advice you give?
I'm so glad you asked that. So, and as an educator, we're often asked to analyze data. We spend hours grading papers. We spend hours looking at the results of those grades. We do so much digging into what our students are able to accomplish. I always ask teachers, what were you able to accomplish today? What's the data on you? And did you analyze that? I find that a lot of teachers don't even have they don't know what their interests are outside of being an educator, or some have interests and they haven't indulged in it in a while because they're so engrossed in the job. And so I highly recommend to educators to put your own self in your lesson plan. So write a lesson plan for yourself where you get that unbothered time of an hour, 30 minutes, or however long you can make it possible to just indulge in something that you enjoy, whether it's a book, sitting outside with a cup of coffee, talking to a friend, painting, art. I'm an artist, so I often do that. Journaling. I've taught lots of teachers across the country my journaling techniques, and I just think it's important that, our society emphasizes the kids are important. Kids first. Keep the kids in front of your work. You have to be filled or you can't pour. You're going to be empty. And so it's important that you take the time to refill yourself through enjoying yourself, through your own personal passions, analyzing the data of your personal life before you go digging into what the students can and cannot do.
That is a lesson that we heard early on this show, so I appreciate you sharing that. Maybe before we leave, where can people find you online, and why don't you plug your websites?
Okay, sure. Thanks. So everybody can find me everywhere at Mrs. Hall Scholars. It's MRS Hall, and then the word scholars. I refer to my students as scholars because I want them to know that they're lifelong learners. And if you search that, I'll pop up on all social media. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned a ton. Hopefully everyone listening did too. LaQuisha, thank you so much for your time. We'll have to have you back on to talk to you again soon.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate and enjoy it.
I hope you pulled some key insights away from that conversation. I know I did. Just an amazing educator. I'm so fortunate that we could have that conversation and share it with all of you. If you like what you heard, definitely hit that subscribe button. Tell a friend about Tackling Tech. Leave us a review if you wouldn't be so kind. Take care of yourself, take care of others around you, and we'll talk to you again next week.